Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today I've got a new collection of creepy stories from Reddit. So sit back, relax, maybe turn off the lights, and get ready for some chilling tales. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which story scared you the most. Alright, let's get started. The morning after, I never got up. Sleep paralysis is different for many people. Some say they just hear things, others claim they see terrifying figures in their room, while some don't see or hear anything at all, but nobody has quite had an experience like I had. It all started when I moved to Shadow Falls for a reporting job with the Shadow Falls Chronicle while also finding an affordable apartment in Midtown. I didn't own a car at the time, but that wasn't much of a problem since my job wasn't far from where I lived, so every morning I'd ride my bike to and from work. One evening I got home like I always did. I took a shower, ordered myself a pizza, laid in bed watching television, and before I knew it, I had drifted off to sleep. Sometime during the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up, but I couldn't move. No matter how hard I tried, my body refused to respond. Then I heard something in my living room. It sounded like my front door was rattling, as if someone was trying to force it open. I lived alone and didn't know anyone in Shadow Falls besides my coworkers, but none of them even knew where I lived. I tried moving my legs, but they felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. As I listened closer, I could hear my living room window being pried open. My heart began pounding out of my chest. I wanted to reach for my phone at the foot of my bed, but my arm wouldn't budge. A few seconds later, I heard slow and heavy footsteps. Each step echoed through the apartment as they made their way down the hallway toward my bedroom. Every footstep grew louder until they finally stopped outside my bedroom door. The doorknob slowly turned and creaked open. Suddenly standing in the doorway was the silhouette of a man. He didn't say a word. He simply stood there watching me. A liquid dripped from his body, collecting into a puddle beneath his feet. The only thing lighting the room was the glow from my television, making it impossible to make out any of his features. For what felt like nearly hours, he just stood there staring at me while I remained completely paralyzed, wondering if I was about to die. Eventually, my body began shutting down from exhaustion. The next thing I remember was waking up the following morning covered in my own urine, but before getting up, I wiggled my toes to make sure I could move again. When they responded, I threw the blankets off, ran into the hallway, and searched every room in my apartment. The man was gone. I convinced myself it had just been a nightmare. After calming myself down, I took a shower, ate breakfast, grabbed my bike, and headed to work. As I rode through Midtown, I couldn't stop yawning. I was exhausted. Whatever happened the night before had kept me from getting any real sleep, but I kept telling myself it couldn't have been real. It had to be a dream. As I approached one of the busier intersections on my route, my eyelids became heavier and heavier. I wasn't paying nearly enough attention to the road. Then everything happened in an instant. All I remember is tires screeching, horns blasting, and a car slammed into me. The impact launched me several feet off my bike before I crashed onto the pavement. For a few moments, I just laid there in pain. Eventually, I climbed to my feet and looked at my bike only to see it completely destroyed. The driver seemed more concerned about the damage to his car than whether I was alright, but honestly, I couldn't have cared less. I just wanted to get to work. So I left my bike where it was and walked the rest of the way, almost as if I hadn't just been hit by a car going 30 miles an hour. When I finally arrived at work, everything felt off. Normally, it was a quiet place to work, so people keeping to themselves wasn't unusual, but today was different. Nobody acknowledged me as I greeted coworkers walking past me. I even stepped into my boss's office to ask him a question, but he never looked up from his paperwork. He acted as though I wasn't even standing there. I figured everyone was still upset because I hadn't turned in an article 2 days earlier. When my shift finally ended, I reached into my pocket to call an Uber home, only to realize my phone was gone. It must have flown out of my pocket during the accident. Great, that meant I had no choice but to walk home. Halfway there, the sky opened up and rain poured down so hard that within seconds I was completely soaked. I couldn't help but laugh, as if this day couldn't get any worse. When I finally reached my apartment, I reached into my pocket for my keys but only felt lint. Those must have flown out during the accident too, I said out loud. With no other choice, I decided to climb through my bedroom window. Using all my strength, I forced it open and pulled myself inside. As I stepped into the apartment, I noticed the television was on in my bedroom. I never left the TV on, and I never closed my bedroom door before leaving for work. My heart started pounding as I thought someone had broken into my apartment. When I got closer to the bedroom, I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath, then I turned it. When I opened the door, everything changed. Because I'm not here to tell you an ordinary story about sleep paralysis. I'm here to tell you that when I opened that bedroom door, I saw myself lying in bed, unable to move, with my eyes fixated on me in absolute terror. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I never got up after that accident at all. It was an interesting story, and now a second one is beginning. My coworkers invited me to a lake trip. I wish I stayed home. I've been at my job for about a year now. It's had its ups and downs, but overall, it's been something I've really learned to enjoy, as crazy as that sounds. The only thing that really made me keep searching for jobs in private was the paycheck. For the work I was doing, I should have at least been making double what I was getting. Plus, the building wasn't air conditioned, and that summer heat can get pretty brutal. What made it bearable, even on the hottest of days, though, were my two coworkers. I'll call them Mike and Dave for the sake of anonymity. We'd all become pretty close friends in my time at the company, and that friendship had even expanded outside of work. We'd hit the bars sometimes, maybe catch a movie. We just enjoyed each other's company. We went through the hard shit together, and I think we kind of just bonded over it. Writing this now, I'm almost getting teary eyed. This whole experience has kind of altered the way I see the two of them, even though I know it's not their fault. Like I said, the pay at this job was barely enough to keep my head above water. Plus, with the manual labor, holding on was beginning to become unbearable, especially in July. I'd applied for jobs before, but I was never really serious about it. I was just casting lines, I suppose. I don't know why this day was so different. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was the mandatory overtime. All I know is when I applied for a new job this time I was serious. It took a few days, but the company eventually got back to me. They wanted to schedule an interview. The day came, and I went to the interview. It went swimmingly. They were basically handing me the job, a nice, cool office building, salary pay, plus my very own cubicle. It was impossible to say no. The day after the interview, I turned my 2 weeks' notice in to my manager. He was disappointed, but overall he was understanding. Mike and Dave, however, basically had complete meltdowns. There was some anger, there was some frustration. But in the end, we all agreed to keep in touch. We'd still see each other, just not on a daily basis anymore. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I got a text from Mike. Hey man, we all gotta hang out before you leave. We may not have the same schedules after this. Me and Dave were thinking to have a lake trip. There's this great spot that I know if you're interested. I responded with a resounding yes. A few beers with some buddies on the lake sounded incredible. Again, impossible to say no. Mike replied with, Great, I'll send you the location. We can meet up after work on Friday. The week went on like normal. We all joked around. Everyone teased me for leaving, but overall, nothing unusual. On Friday, after work, I drove home to get showered and grab a few things for the night, including beer, a sleeping bag, and 3 full bottles of bug spray. As I was packing the bag, I got a text from Dave. He had sent me the location. I stared at my phone and felt my stomach drop. I hadn't expected the lake to be an hour and 30 minutes out. He followed up with, We're on the way now. So naturally, I pushed my feelings aside and hurried out the door. It was already 5:45 p.m. and I was burning daylight. I drove a little over the speed limit for nearly the entire drive. All the while, a million things ran through my mind. My new job. My old job. How annoyed I was at how long this drive was. How excited I was to spend the night on the lake with my friends. Mainly annoyed at how long the drive was, though. The closer I got, the more desolate everything became. Less traffic, less gas stations. Hell, less road, more trees. When I finally got to the last 10 miles, it was hardly even a road at all. It was more like a dirt path, wide enough for either a family of 4 or a small car, and I had to stay on it for 10 whole miles. The trees made it look darker than it was. They cast shadows over the dirt road that made it seem like the sun had already set. I had to keep my speed between 20 and 30 miles an hour the entire way, and I swore I could hear animals chirping over the thumping of my car's speakers. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity on that road, I came to a clearing. It was where the road ended. I assumed it was where I was supposed to park. I was kind of confused as to how I was the first person there. Mike and Dave had left before me. I assumed that maybe they had stopped off at a convenience store or something to grab some snacks or something. I got out to stretch my legs after the long car ride. While I stretched, I analyzed my surroundings. It looked like I was in the middle of nowhere. Red Solo cups littered the ground, and I could see the deep dirt prints that indicated someone had been doing donuts here recently. As I looked around, I noticed a trail that led deeper into the forest, toward what I assumed to be the lake. I tried texting Mike to check in, but I had zero cell reception. I figured, fuck it, you know? I'll just walk down and see what I can see. I started down the path and followed it for about a mile. I swear I had this weird feeling of being watched the entire time. I kept hearing sticks breaking behind me. I even thought I heard footsteps a few times, but anytime I looked behind me, they'd stop and there'd be no one there. I ignored my nerves and kept walking. When I reached the end, I was amazed at the scene that lay before me. The lake was absolutely gorgeous. The sun bounced off the crisp blue water. A breeze ran through my hair. The sound of crickets and cicadas filled the crisp forest air. It was like I was in heaven. I sat on a rock near the edge of the lake, just taking in the scenery while I waited for my friends. I'm not sure how much time passed, but eventually I heard the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping behind me again. Only this time, when I turned around, I actually saw someone. They were staring at me, peeking at me from behind this tree like a kid playing hide and seek. It looked like Dave, but he was different somehow. He didn't have life in his eyes. His face was stretched somehow, like I was looking at a mask made of Dave rather than Dave himself. He was smiling at me with this intense, hungry looking smile, like his teeth were a bear trap. And when he spoke, what he said just didn't make sense. Over here, Don. The lake's over here. I stared at him for a second, debating on how to respond. While our eyes were locked, he did something with his neck. It was like a horse or deer or something, like he was trying to scratch his back with his head before it snapped back in my direction. Over here, Don. The lake's over here. My heart was beating faster now. My fight or flight was beginning to kick in, but I never took my eyes off of him. He never blinked. He just kept peeking at me from behind the tree. Then Mike appeared, standing behind a separate tree. The same lifeless eyes as Dave, the same stretched skin and hungry smile. I was shaking at this point. I don't know how I managed to call out to them, but I did. Guys, I don't know if this is a prank because you're mad about me leaving or if you just wanted to fuck with me, but this isn't funny. There was silence for a moment, then two, then three. Finally, Mike replied in a voice that sounded more like mine than his. This isn't funny. My eyes darted toward the trail I had come from. It was about 30 feet away from me and 50 away from them. I took my chances and I absolutely booked it. I have never ran faster in my life. The mile felt like nothing because I was too focused on the sound of sticks breaking behind me. It sounded like entire trees were snapping like toothpicks, and the ground felt like it was shaking from the weight of whatever was behind me. When I reached the clearing, I was still the only car there, and I basically slid across my hood, trying to get to my door. I peeled out of the clearing as fast as my car would allow, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw them again, Mike and Dave, peeking at me from behind the trees. I must have burned through a half tank of gas flying down that dirt road. When I finally reached the main road and cell signal returned, the first thing I did was call Dave. It rang for a few seconds before he picked up, sounding as cool as a cucumber. You, Don, where you at? What the fuck do you mean, where am I at? Where the fuck are you at? We're at the lake, dude. We've been waiting on you for like an hour. I paused. An hour? I was just at the lake. I swear you two were there, but your cars weren't. Nah, man. We both got our cars. All that's missing is yours, cutie. Hold on, let me look. There was silence for a moment while Dave looked at his message to me. Okay, so don't hate me. I may have sent you the wrong location. The one I sent was for a party I went to last week. Can't believe you drove all the way out there without even checking. Ha ha ha. I just hung up the phone and drove home in silence. Mike and Dave both kept calling me periodically throughout the night. I just kept sending them to voicemail. The calls stopped at around midnight, but Dave still sent me one last message. A picture of the lake they were at, and a single text that read, Over here, Don. The lake's over here. The next story is about an incident while fishing. I'm a fisherman, and something is wrong with the fish. I've been working as a fisherman for 12 years. Every 3 days, I take my boat out with my crew onto the nearby lake, and we stay out there for 6 hours catching as much as possible. I've seen all kinds of fish, but starting 2 weeks ago, the fish were acting like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was a breezy day, as it usually is out on the lake, but something in the air felt colder than usual. We had been out there for about 2 hours when one of my partners caught a catfish that seemed to have multiple deep cuts. They didn't seem like anything done by a boat motor or other fishermen, more like something a mammal would do. The weirdest part was that it was still alive. We figured it must have been attacked by a bear or something and somehow lived and ignored it. Even since then, We kept catching fish with deep gashes or cuts across its body. We finally caught a normal fish on the next trip out and decided to take it back as well as some of the other wounded fish to get tested by an expert to see what could be doing this. We got the results back a week later. According to the expert, the gashes on one of the fish we caught the day we sent it in had gashes over 2 weeks old. The healthy one we sent in was normal. The cuts were compared to claw patterns of nearby wildlife, but nothing matched. On our next day out, we caught 2 more healthy fish and 4 more wounded ones. One of my shipmates was good with technology, so he recommended we put a tracker in one of the healthy fish to see where it goes. We watched as the tracker moved across the lake until it reached an area we didn't usually go due to there not being many fish. The tracker then suddenly disconnected, then reconnected, but was on the shore. We went over and found the tracker sitting on the shore, but no fish. There were also claw marks, similar to the ones the fish had marked in the dirt next to it. The next trip was just me because the rest of my shipmates were ill. I was somewhat sick too, but I pushed through it. I normally didn't go out during the night, but I had spent the day researching lake creatures that could leave claw marks like that, as well as cryptid tales of lake monsters. I didn't expect to catch anything, but something caught my line. I reeled it up, but nothing was there. The bait was gone. Then I noticed a faint light beneath the surface of the water. It was a small orange light, about the size of a tennis ball. It then moved, faster than any fish could. I sped after it, eventually stopping near where the tracker was found. The glowing ball stopped, and a thin diamond appeared in the middle. It was an eye. The thing then went deeper into the lake. I grabbed the harpoon I never wanted to use unless it was an emergency, and shot it. A loud piercing scream echoed through the water. Unfortunately, my brain grazed over the idea that it could just speed away, pulling the harpoon with it, and I was dragged into the water as it went faster than my boat could. I was now in the middle of the lake with something I couldn't even see due to it already being dark out. I felt something grab my leg, and I then felt pain I could never even imagine. I kicked at the thing, but I could only move one of my legs. Adrenaline gave me the ability to push through the pain and swim for my life. Thankfully, I'd been wearing a life vest as I usually do when on the water. The creature seemed to be in pain too, as it sped away from me slower than it had been going before. When I finally reached the shore, I realized what the pain had been. My entire right leg had been ripped clean off. That's why I couldn't feel it. I called an ambulance and told them something in the water had ripped my leg off. They arrived shortly, as well as marine biologists, including the expert I had sent the fish samples to. In the hospital, I told both of them what I had seen and about the fish. I was also told all of my shipmates had died of a rare parasite that was also found to be present in the healthy fish, but not the injured ones. I was tested for the parasite, but it was only found at the very end of what was left of my leg, so they amputated the rest of it. Then 2 people wearing all black came into the hospital room and whispered something to each other and led everyone out, except for the nurse taking care of me. I was just discharged 2 days ago, and I don't think I'm ever going near major bodies of water again. I don't know what happened to the fish. I don't know what that thing was. All I know is last night I went back to that lake to recover my boat and saw 4 more glowing orange lights in the water. And the next story is dedicated to a somewhat strange family. My wife keeps burying things in our backyard. Everything is happening so fast. I'm not sure when she had this mental break, but if I had to guess, I'm assuming it's when our daughter was born. In the weeks that followed, I think her exhaustion started to take hold of her. She started talking in her sleep. Hell, she even started sleepwalking. The things she'd say in her sleep led me to believe she was having nightmares. Lots of tossing and turning, lots of grunting. Sometimes she'd wake up screaming either mine or my daughter's name. What concerned me most, however, was what she'd do in her sleep. It took me a while to notice. She'd wake up with dirt covering her hands and mud caking her fingernails. She liked to garden, so of course I didn't think much of it. But when things started going missing, that's when I knew something was afoot. Baby bottles, pacifiers, family photos. It was gradual, but the more I noticed, the more I'd scratch my head. Our daughter would go crazy. Both me and my wife would search the house thoroughly for any of her missing toys, missing bibs or fresh diapers. She swore up and down that she had no idea where anything was. I wanted to believe her, and I did for a time. But when she woke me up one night while sneaking out of bed, I realized what was really going on. I thought it was because the baby was crying. I thought that she was just going to rock her back to sleep, but she was snoring as she rose from our bed. I chose to follow her, just to see what she does when this kind of thing happens. I ignored our baby just for a while and tiptoed behind my wife as she made her way through our bedroom and loomed over our daughter's crib. I expected her to reach down and pick her up, but instead she took the crib mobile that hung over my baby's head, completely ignoring her wails as she walked towards the dark hallway. From there, she glided down the stairs and through the kitchen and dining room. She looked completely cognizant as she opened the back door and walked out into the night. I was always told you're not supposed to wake a sleepwalker, so I just watched her as she dropped to her hands and knees and began clawing at the dirt in the backyard. I was nervous, but more so, I was stunned, distracted by the dozen patches of dirt that I had neglected to notice since this all started happening. She dug a hole about a foot deep and a foot wide with her bare hands before dropping the mobile inside. Still snoring, still with her eyes closed, she filled the hole, walked past me and back to our bedroom, and collapsed into bed, our baby still wailing. It was up to me to get the baby back to sleep that night. I held her tight, rocking her gently until silence fell over the room. I woke up the next morning with a clear mission: find my daughter's missing toys. I went outside with a trowel and began slowly digging. I found the bottles, found the toys and bibs. But when I confronted my wife about it, she was adamant that it wasn't her. She cried when I showed her the holes in the yard. She cried harder when I showed her the dirty bottles and baby clothes. She seemed both confused and remorseful. For a while after that, the sleepwalking stopped, the talking didn't. But that was something I could live with. At least things weren't going missing anymore, at least for a while. I'm writing this now because I woke up this morning in a bed full of dirt. I woke up to a wife covered in grime and mud, and I woke up to a silent house with an empty crib in the corner of our bedroom. I panicked, my wife panicked, and immediately the two of us ran to the backyard. We're waiting on the police now, because the grave in the backyard was much bigger than any of the others, and instead of crying, my wife, she won't stop laughing. The next story is connected to school and those school days. Countdown. It was a normal day at school. The clock had struck 11, and I knew it was almost time for lunch, the time when every kid is happy. Not me. I wasn't happy because I knew those other kids, Johnny and Benny, were after me. I had done something bad. Well, bad according to them, because they're the typical bullies you'd see in a classic 80s movie like The Karate Kid. But there was no cool Mr. Miyagi. He's a cool character anyway. I went to lunch as usual, stressed because I knew they were waiting. But it was unusual. As I got inside the lunchroom, the two weren't waiting for me by the door. It was so weird. Whenever I've gotten in trouble with them before, they usually wait right there for me. And today, nothing. This seemed suspicious. After lunch, the question was still lingering in my brain. Where the hell did Johnny and Benny go? I didn't know, and I didn't honestly care. I got back to my seat, and we continued class until the announcement. The dreadful announcement, the one I had been dreading forever. A school lockdown. It wasn't a drill. Standard procedure happened. We heard the gunshots. We heard the carnage. It wasn't pleasant. Then he got to our door. Of all doors, this school shooter came to ours, then knocked. Everyone stayed silent. Then another knock. No one said a word. Then I grabbed a pencil and stabbed the teacher to death. It was very, very pleasant. I had been waiting to kill that bitch for a while. She was awful. Then I started grabbing other, more powerful objects. I was a fairly big kid, so I was able to take the other kids out fairly easily. Watching their dead bodies drop to the floor, the blood, the guts, the gore, the screaming. It was finally here. It was like Christmas morning, the day you dread, but the day you are excited for. You dread it because, oh, what if I don't get the presents I want? But what if I do? This was the happiest day of my life. To be able to be somebody to kill, to finally have a day in anything, to finally have the power over the powerful. I let my best friend Ben inside the classroom. I knew what happened to Johnny and Benny. We killed them too. It was very pleasant. We had both been waiting for this moment. We've never been popular. We've never been anything. But now, we've reclaimed power. We're not alone anymore. The silence of the performative crowd, the silence of the performative, pain-causing teachers. But I had to kill Ben because he was a liability. I took his gun and went to kill the rest of my hit list. I was doing this for the other loners and outsiders. It's time for my rebellion. I am justice. I think I should have stayed. This is a night I remember as if it just happened. It was the late 80s, I'd say, around 87, 88. I was a rebellious teen at the time, so I was drinking heavily and hitting the hookah like it was an oxygen tank, and I was on my last breaths. Memories were fuzzy and barely legible, besides just blobs of color and a faint smell of marijuana, but it was this night that still haunts me to this day. It was a cool, misty Halloween night when I encountered that thing. I went to a Halloween party at my friend Spencer's house, who lived not all that far but far enough away from me. It was a mile hike to get there, but the quickest way to get to my friend's house was to pass through a long, forgotten cemetery in a pretty dense, wooded area. Walking there was the easy part, but getting home was the hardest, as there were stumps, roots, and low-hanging branches that I had to avoid. And well, being an arrogant teen then, and not having any phones at the time, I didn't bring any light source with me, thinking I'd be fine, a few drinks won't get to me, and I'll be home by curfew. I remember that night I got hammered because, being the stupid high school burnout I was, I loved to party and get drunker than an Irishman on St. Patrick's Day. It was nearing midnight, and I needed to get back home. My friend offered to let me stay over for the night, but being the stubborn, drunken ass I was, and knowing the wrath of my mother, I decided to walk home. The only things that were on my mind at the time was to make it home before 12, and try not to act drunk and stoned when I entered the house. I was making it through the woods, seemingly at a good pace. I was dizzy, things were swirling, and with no light, and the ground being a bit wet from the mist, I tripped multiple times and twisted my ankle in the process. I made it to the abandoned cemetery, and I knew for sure I was halfway home. Everything began to slow, and my ankle began to throb because it hurt so bad. I didn't have that far to go, and I had to trek it due to no one knowing where I was, and no one knew the way I went to get to Spencer's house. I was about halfway through the cemetery as I began to hear the sound of digging. It could have been my mind fucking with me, but I could have sworn I saw a tall, tattered, dirty-looking man. He seemed to be in his early 60s, had short, gray, unkempt, greasy hair, and was very skinny, nearly bone-thin. I think the most stupid decision that I made in my life up to that point was when I decided to call out to him in the drunken stupor I was in. I called out, "Hey buddy, what you doing out here at this time of night?" He ignored my call, deciding to continue digging in the hole he made. I guess I felt offended that he ignored me, because this is exactly what came out from behind my teeth right after. "Hey, who the fuck do you think you are ignoring me, asshole?" As soon as that sentence slipped out of my lips, he stopped what he was doing and turned around to look at me. His face was skeletally thin with these small, sunken and glossed-over eyes, and a mouthful of yellowed, nearly blackened teeth, surrounded by a big, gray, unkempt beard and mustache. The look of pure hate that he gave off brought me from my drunken state to completely sobered up with an intense fear crawling down my back. I was at a distance where he wouldn't get me, but once I blinked, he was charging towards me at full speed, dragging a heavily rusted shovel behind him. I hobbled fast and tried to run past, but the next thing I knew, I was on the ground. My chest was heavy, and I couldn't breathe. I clotheslined myself by a low, hanging branch, and now I'm on my back trying to get my breath back, but it wasn't coming back. I could hear the fast, thunderous steps trailing close behind. It was hard, but with what strength I could muster, I got up and, not daring to look back, began to hobble out of the woods. The street was so close I could feel it. I never thought pavement could look so good. I was at the entrance when I was tackled to the ground with something being stabbed into my back. The putrid scent of rot permeated my nostrils before I was stabbed again in the back by this entity. I struggled to get up and to get him off. I managed to grab one of his legs and trip him down to the ground. I got on top of him and began to punch his ugly face with what strength I had left. I forgot to pin his arms before I was stabbed in the abdomen by what I see now was a sickle. I rolled off of him, now spitting up blood, as he began to drag me back to the cemetery. I passed out due to the pain not too long after. I don't remember hearing much after, but when I woke up, I was in the hospital, all bandaged up with large, stitched gash wounds all over my arms and abdomen. My family was there waiting for me to wake up, which was a much-needed sight after the previous night. My doctor came in a little bit after I woke up. She told me that I had broken my ankle and a rib which punctured my lung, and that I had lost a part of my liver, a kidney, and my gallbladder. She also told me that a stranger found me in the woods, not too deep in, all bloodied, beaten, and cut up, but noticed that I was still alive. To whoever it was that saved my ass, I owe you my life. About a month after the incident, everything seemed fine again. The local news got their headline of the month. I became the popular kid in school for a bit. All was right with me and my family. Christmas time was around the corner, and I had received a letter from an unknown person with an unknown address. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it expecting to see a postcard from a family member or at least a card from a church. Instead, what was inside was a dirty, blood-stained page of notebook paper that read, "Your kidney was divine. Too bad I can't say the same for your liver." Alright, that's all for today's video. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know which story creeped you out the most. This has been Mansipam, and I'll see you in the next one.